Today I want to introduce you to some JavaScript types. We're going to stick with the primitive JavaScript types today, and we're going to look at number, string, and Boolean. Number includes whole numbers and decimal numbers. So a whole number is the same thing as an integer. 1, 2, 3, 45, 3006, 1 trillion, 200 billion, etc. And it also includes our negative numbers, and we just put a minus sign in front of the same whole numbers. In addition to whole numbers, JavaScript number also includes decimal numbers. So anything that has a decimal point in it, like 99.5 or 3.14. Decimal numbers can also be expressed in scientific notation, and that's when we put the E in the number. So let's take a look at that example. If I type 1.74 e to the 5, that is the scientific notation of saying take the number 1.74 and multiply it by 10 to the power of 5. So 10 to the power of 5 is just moving the decimal point to the right 5 places. So it was between the 1 and 7, and if we move it to the right 5 places, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then we end up with 174,000. Scientific notation can also use negative numbers, and the negative number just moves that decimal point to the left instead of to the right. In some programming languages, whole numbers and decimal numbers are represented by different types. Whole numbers are represented by integers. Decimal numbers are represented by floats. There are also other terms that are used in different languages. But in JavaScript, we don't have to worry about those details. Any number is simply of the type number. Let's look at our next JavaScript type. It's called string. String is the type represented by any character that is strung together in a sequence that becomes a string. It's also known as text. So here are a couple examples. We have hello, and we have JavaScript can be used to write fun programs. Could be a simple word, it could be a full sentence, it could be a paragraph, it could be garbage. It doesn't matter what's inside the quotations. What matters is that the string must be surrounded by quotation marks. JavaScript is also flexible in that it doesn't matter if you use single or double quotation marks. They still represent the same string. Some characters are just not found on your keyboard. If you want to add a character that's not found on your keyboard, you can use a Unicode value. There are tables, you can look up different codes, and I have an example here on the slide. You can use \u to specify that it's Unicode, and the code is 03C0 that will give us the symbol for the lowercase pi. Let's give it a try. I have to put it in quotation marks because it needs to be interpreted as a string. I put the \u in for the code to make sure it's interpreted as Unicode, and then I can put in the Unicode code 03C0. Oh, and I forgot the closing quotation mark, so it didn't give me pi yet. Let me put that on there. And now I have the pi symbol, and I can use that in my code. So we can look up on the internet Unicode tables and find the code for any symbol that we might want to use. So here's an example. The copyright symbol is the Unicode value 00A9. So if we go ahead and put that in our console in quotation marks, /U00A9, and that gives us that copyright symbol. So if you want to use some characters that aren't on your keyboard, Unicode can be very handy, but there's no need to do any memorization of the Unicode table. You can just look those up as you need them. The next type I want to talk about is Boolean. Boolean is also known as truth values. There are only two possible values for Boolean. It's either true or it's false. And those words true and false are actually keywords that we can use that represent the values. If you want to find out what the type of any literal is, you can use the function typeOf. If you put typeOf followed by some literal, or we'll learn about variables later, you'll be able to find out what type JavaScript thinks that literal is. So let's take a look at that. Now we know 4 is a whole number, so it should be the JavaScript type number. And if we type in type of 4, you'll see that it will tell us, yes, that is a number. If we type in type of hello, we put quotation marks around it so it knows it's a string and it will return a string. If we do type of true, it's that keyword true, and so it's going to return us Boolean. But you have to be a little careful with true and false, because if you were to put that true in quotation marks, it no longer is a keyword. It is just a string of characters, and therefore it will return the string. Now, if we forget to put those quotation marks around our string, JavaScript won't know what it is. It's going to return undefined because JavaScript is interpreting that as a variable, and we're going to learn about variables later. So we've learned about JavaScript types, and now it's important to talk about how we can use JavaScript types. We looked at expressions and learned about using just simple math expressions and that JavaScript can evaluate those. We can also write expressions with Booleans, and we're going to learn more about these symbols here, the double ampersand and the double straight lines up and down. Those represent Boolean operators and or. We also can operate on strings by concatenating strings together. Let's take this example here. Now, if I paste it just as it is, unfortunately, the console doesn't know that these quotation marks are just regular quotation marks. They're interpreting them as the Unicode symbol for the special quotation mark that is used to make an opening and a closing quotation mark. So in order to get the regular quotation mark, if we're going to do a copy and paste, sometimes we'll find that we have to go ahead and switch those out on our keyboard unless they were specifically copied into the slide with the correct quotation marks. So now, when I do the addition, it's going to take those string of characters and shove them into a single string of characters. And we're going to learn more about concatenation also later. So we've talked about the primitive JavaScript types. We covered numbers, strings, and Booleans, and we will be covering additional JavaScript types later in this course.